Yes.
Okay, good. So I'll go ahead and get started then. We may have some people jump on, and that's fine. A little bit about this training and presentation. At the beginning of this year, the management team and a few of our counselors went to the Dead Talks. I think it's ICCFA in Las Vegas, and we were able to spend some days there at a training and learning about different things. The format was Dead Talks, like I said, and they're so little short 20-minute talks about different topics. This one I found the most impactful for my, so I can't here for this because it was not mine. I actually ended up emailing the speaker afterwards and asking for her slides. Her name's Shannon Martin. She works in Colorado. Really great, very nice lady who was kind enough to share her slides with me. And I've trained all of my new hires and team in California on it. And so I'm going to continue to do that because I think, honestly, when I heard it, it really affected the way that I looked at the way I was running my business and selling cremation. Out here in California, we have a really high cremation rate, so we do a lot of cremation sales. And I feel like I wasn't providing the right level of service after I heard this presentation, just because I wasn't going through these questions in this order. And I know that I was good at presenting and selling and doing all of that, but if you ask the family these 5 questions that this presentation will go over in this order, you can provide a way more meaningful experience to them and give them more options. And also, it's a way to increase, the contract price, of course, if you're adding things to the cremation service that you're selling. So the presentation starts talking about, I've chosen cremation and now what's left. So the decisions that you have to make, there are 5 choices that we need to ask every family who talks about cremation for themselves or for a loved one. And when you decide on cremation, the thing to know and to keep in your mind is that cremation is the final disposition. So everything else around the cremation affects the family and their experience. The cremation is actually, what happens to the deceased, and everything that comes before that can really, really up the experience and make it more memorable for their families. So I know that I've been in the business long enough, and I'm sure some of us have as well, where you've walked into a room with a family and they say, well, I just want to be cremated, that's it. And when you ask them, what does that look like to you? What does cremation look like in your family? You find out that, well, there's a viewing before that. And, before they're going to be scattered at sea and all of these different things that go into it. So rather than saying, okay, great, here's a direct cremation, all we'll do is pick you up, cremate you, and then return the ashes to your family, you can provide more options that give them a more meaningful experience and make that just a better experience overall. So we'll go through the questions, and basically what we're trying to do is present meaningful and personalized options for each decision. So we'll break them out in order that they should be asked, and I'll discuss why they fit together in this certain way. In the email I sent out letting everybody know about this particular training, there is an attachment attached that has a little worksheet that you can use afterwards. Print it out, practice with it. I keep it at my desk. Whenever I talk about cremation over the phone, I still have it and look over it just so that it's right in front of me, but it's really great. So guiding principles for reviewing the 5 questions. So we'll start by talking about providing the why, and then followed by ask, acknowledge, educate, and recommend. So when we find out the why, basically we're asking them, why have you chosen this? What does this look like for your family? And what kind of experience do you want to have, essentially? So when you ask that question, you're going to get a lot, basically, when they say, well, in cremation in my family, what we were thinking about was ... Acknowledging, the next step here is basically acknowledging what they've said. Okay, I understand that that's what you want, or many families have found that, that's the same case for them when they talk about cremation, or, I understand and I agree with what you're saying. Here's how we can fulfill that. And that leads you right into the educate step. So what we're doing is educating them on all of their options and recommending, based on the feedback that they've given us, when you're asking your initial questions, what we think would fit best for their service. So uncovering the plan, fulfilling it. And then the educate step is really key here, is knowing your products and services. I know that, like Cindy, you mentioned, you're really new to this industry, so this will take a little bit of time, but we do have a lot of materials to go over with cremation, and a lot of options as well that you can share with families. Once you get those all down, you'll really be able to use this tactic and get great cremations. So the first decision a family has to make is a gathering. So whether or not they're going to have a gathering, and what that's going to look like. Now, a lot of times when people walk in, oh, I just want to be cremated, just we'll handle it. My family will take care of it, or I don't want to service, and it's not really important. It's important to first acknowledge that, of course, that's what they think, and maybe that does fit best for them. Maybe they don't have any friends. Maybe they're in advanced age and all of their friends have passed away. I run into that situation quite a bit out here. But when you're asking them if they're younger and they still have children or families, it's important to let them know that research shows a gathering of some sort doesn't necessarily have to be a service at the mortuary, but some sort of gathering is really important in facilitating that first step in the grief process for their loved ones. So if they're leaving behind any kind of people that they care about, again, children, family, relatives, a spouse, a gathering can really help in facilitating their grieving process and get them on the way to the new normal, which is a term we talk about a lot in this industry. So when someone says, well, I just want to be cremated, great. Have you ever thought about what your family wants? A service of some sort. Oftentimes you'll get, well, yeah, probably they'll do something at a restaurant or maybe some type of dinner or something like that. Great, that's awesome. I hear what you're saying. Did you know that a lot of families do a service at the mortuary with catering involved afterwards? We have a big, beautiful reception hall with catering space and catering options available. So just one way to educate them and then show them, and maybe even possibly recommend something that could take the burden away from their family from having to organize a dinner or a service afterwards. Decision 2, after we talk about a gathering, a viewing. So now this would lead you into, do you want to be viewed after death occurs? And here's a good way. On the handout, this is how they phrase this. Before cremation is scheduled, we like to offer a time for a final viewing to say goodbye and to confirm identification. So a viewing can be all the way up to a wooden casket, with a full service, down to just what we call an ID viewing out here. I'm not sure the lingo at all of your mortuaries, but an ID viewing is something really simple where maybe they set their features and do a light dress of makeup, put them on a gurney, and then the family has 30 minutes with them in the chapel. Generally it's immediate family only, and no embalming is administered. So that's an option that we offer at a lot of my firms out here. And ultimately what that looks like is different for each family, and how you can influence their decision here is essentially by giving them the different options for that viewing. So if people are like, well, yeah, I probably do want, my kids to be able to say goodbye, that's great. How many kids do you have? Well, I have, 7 children, and they have spouses, and then they have kids, and so on. Then we're looking at something more than what we term as an ID viewing here, which is just immediate family only and really small. So most mortuaries aren't going to take on the burden of, presenting a deceased without some sort of sanitary care or embalming, especially if they're little children. Attending this viewing, they don't want to risk scarring them for life. So we're going to recommend embalming at that point and provide that type of viewing for the family. Moving on to the third decision, cremation container. Now, this blew my mind, honestly. For years, I've been selling cremation and just going with, what, the cardboard box is included, you don't need anything else. So I'll share a little story about my own personal experience here. When I was working in Dallas at one of the most expensive mortuaries in the country called Sparkman Hillcrest, basically, I went to the hospital to do an imminent situation for a woman whose husband was dying. And I get there, she wanted cremation, didn't really want a viewing. And when we got to this cremation container part, I just said, well, the cardboard box is included. And she immediately put the brakes on and said, you know what, I can't even think about him in a cardboard box. What else do you have? I love this man. He's taken care of me my whole life. That type of situation. So I ended up just showing her all of our wooden casket options because we had that available, and I knew you can cremate a wood casket. So She ended up selecting a solid mahogany casket for $9,200.
Mm.
Now, when I got back to the office, my bosses were thrilled with me. Absolutely. Oh my God, you turned a simple cremation into, something that's more than twice what that costs. So, and I felt pretty good about it, but I didn't, I didn't even really let this impact me the way I feel like I should have now. Looking back, I wasn't selling anything. I basically just showed her options. But what she said that I really should have kept with me was that, man, I can't even think about him in a cardboard box. What else do you have? So that phrase right there, I think not only because they have the money to spend on it, but a lot of families will experience that as well. If you actually, and you should be telling them, okay, so what's included here is this. It is the most basic container, just a cardboard cremation container. A lot of people would kind of balk at that and say, oh man, I don't want to think about my mom or parent or myself in one of those. So really, you should be showing them options. I've pretty much taken out of all of my cremation presentations, whether it's a direct cremation or not, this is included, you don't have to worry about it. And I basically just open the casket book and say, here are the cremation casket options. Take a look and see what works best for you. A lot of people will look at it and say, wait, it's going to be burned up anyway. Why do I need to spend money on this? You know what? You don't have to. This cardboard box is included. Here it is. That's your option. You can have that. I'm not trying to upsell you anything. I'm just here to show you your options and let you know what's available. A lot of people I have found since I've started practicing this, they've chosen things other than the cardboard box. And so that not only offers them a little bit more peace of mind for themselves and for their family, but it also increases your ticket price. This is one way where you can increase your contract price and without even really having to push. This is a place where people will make their own decision, and the outcome of this decision will affect the viewing experience. So if they decide to do an ID viewing, for example, feel free to offer these options. I've had families choose a wooden casket because they know that their children are going to see them in this casket and they don't want them to see them in a cardboard box. So this one really did impact me a lot. And so this is why I pretty much changed the entire way that I sell cremation. And this is what I've adopted all of these steps and asking these 5 questions in this order. Moving on to the next part. So a lot of us probably think after that, the next thing is, okay, let's pick an urn. Well, before you do that, permanent placement, you should ask them about that. Because you don't want to select an urn that's not right for what they need. A lot of families will, decide to keep the ashes at home. And of course, at that point, you just go with, yeah, absolutely, pick any urn that you want. But if we're placing ashes in, for an example, a niche in a national cemetery, those are pretty small. So if you try to sell an urn that's like a big, beautiful glass vase, it's just not going to fit in there. So we have specific urn options that are available to fit those smaller niches. If the family decides, you know what, we're not going to keep the ashes at home, we're just going to scatter them on a mountaintop, we have scattering tubes. We have different options to give them a more meaningful experience, something that they can hold that'll make it a little bit easier to scatter. Those biodegradable urns that you can be placed in the water and disintegrate over time. Sometimes they're a few hours or 24 hours, something like that. We have a couple different options there, and those should be available at all of your firms. But really, the key here is knowing that you need to ask about permanent placement before we select that urn. Does that make sense, hopefully? And just knowing the answer to that question really helps your recommendations as far as the urns go. So, and then the last question here, our urn, and this is just like what I was saying. This is the last decision that you should make with the family, and it should match their overall experience. So if they're having a service, you can see a picture here of this urn wreath wrapped around this really pretty stone urn. That could be something that the kids take a picture of and remember forever. So the scattering tube here and then the biodegradable urn as well. So 4 and 5 questions kind of go hand in hand, but just making sure that you do this in the correct order is really, really important, because God forbid you sell them a beautiful big glass vase, then they get to the National Cemetery and it just doesn't fit and they won't accept it. So that could really, really affect what happens and how the funeral directors look and all of that stuff. Surely they'll catch that before we get to the National Cemetery, but it is important that they don't have to change that with the family at the time of the deceased passing. So the last slide here talks about professional courage. So really what we define this as is the way to guide your clients to make informed decisions that lead to meaningful experiences. The key word here is guide. What we're doing is guiding our families into making the right decisions that are going to give them the most meaningful experiences, and make it as smooth as possible for them. I'm sure that you're all really good at this in person, of course, meeting with them, and now we're doing things over the phone and online. But the professional courage is really being able to acknowledge and then ask them questions, and then also recommend and guide them into things that maybe they didn't even think about. Like I said at the beginning, we've all been in rooms where someone's like, oh, I just want cremation, but that really looks like a service and a viewing, and then they're going to be placed in the National Cemetery. So there are a lot more steps involved, rather than just cremating, picking up and cremating and then returning the ashes to a loved one. So the mortuary and the funeral home, they can be way more involved and make the process a lot more smooth for the family when that time comes. So we just need to have that professional courage to guide the person we're talking to pre-need about into that. So that's it. That's the last thing here. I'll show you.
Hey, Michael, it's so funny because Linda and I were talking this morning, and she was telling me that when someone does want to be cremated, we don't want to just assume. We ask them, have you thought about what type of urn? And they'll say, oh, we just want the plastic box. And so she said, she always brings out one. She goes, I just want you to be prepared, because I've had some families come in and they've broken down because they don't realize what it looks like. And they'll say, nope, that's fine. And she goes, great. And when they realize we're not trying to talk them into buying something, we're just trying to prepare them versus, and then they realize, oh, they're looking out for my best interest. They're not trying to force me into buying something. They just want to help me be prepared. Because some people have never seen what the plastic boxes look like. And
That's
so
right.
it's like, so instead of looking like a villain, you turn out looking like a hero.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really all about how you frame those type of things as well. Yeah, if you just, sometimes when I describe the black plastic box, I say, oh, you know what, you're old enough to remember what a VCR tape container looks like. It's basically made of that, and that's kind of what it looks like. It's just a little bit bigger. Sometimes people laugh at that and think that's funny, and sometimes people turn their nose up and say, well, what else do you have? Because that doesn't sound appealing at all.
Right.
Yeah, and that's perfect. That's a perfect example of that. And I think that's a really great practice to have that nearby, especially if you're in the office and can do that. Showing them what that actually looks like. That's what that's going to be.
I had in my notebook for when we can start doing in home, I have a whole brochure, more than a brochure. I have several pages, depending on what kind of service they're going to, if they want, for the urns, so they can actually look at it.
Yeah.
And we have quite a selection here in the office. So a lot of times we'll have people that love that they can actually see, feel it, and touch it versus just looking at a picture.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I've been using the Matthews Aurora app for a while. That's on my iPad, and there's pictures that you can just slide through, and they can pick a bunch of different things. So that tool is really important, especially when you're doing things in home. Have something that you can show them. You don't want to carry a big box of several urns in, of course, but something on paper or on an iPad, that's really useful. Another thing that I just thought about is when families say, oh, we'll just scatter the ashes in a certain place, you kind of want to prepare them for what that experience is like as well. Probably a lot of us have seen The Big Lebowski, where they open the coffee can and the ashes blow up in someone's face. It's kind of a fine powder that is returned to the family, and it doesn't just pepper out like a salt shaker. It kind of, if you pour it out in the water, it just kind of clunks out. So it's not that great of an experience. We do have those scattering tubes that allow a little bit, kind of a softer exit of the ashes from the urn. So there are different options and different things that you can provide as far as the urn choice goes. So on my screen now, what we have is just this, the little handout that we received from the presentation, and And it's, again, in that email that I sent letting everybody know about this training. So feel free to print this out, practice, and just keep these questions in your mind in this order. Does anybody have any specific questions or anything they'd like to share at this point? Okay, good deal. Well, guys, I thank you so much. This was really meant to be just a short training on cremation, but again, it really changed the way that I viewed selling cremation after I heard it. Literally the day after I got back, I emailed Shannon Martin and asked for the slides because I was like, this is so important. I need to share it with my entire team. So I hope that this is useful for you. Yes.
I just wanted to jump in. I love that, Suzanne. Sorry, I mute people as I can hear the background noise. But I think that's great advice. Just listen. On the urns too, as you're meeting with families, you find that you generally sell maybe 6 to 8 urns 90% of the time. And so if you just find those, show them the most common urns. But usually the first 2 or 3 you show them are the ones they're going to choose, similar to caskets. So I love that. And it's about giving them the choice. So they don't feel like it's not about upselling them. It's just about giving them those options. But I love the story Michael shared at the beginning. The lady at ICCFA had said that her mom kept saying, I just want to be cremated. I just want to be cremated. I mean, she must have said it 10 times. And so she finally said, okay, Mom. And this was the phrase I loved. Mom, what does that look like to you? Oh, well, I want to have the viewing at the church and then the full Catholic Mass. And then I want to, instead of going to the graveside, I want to be cremated. So she was actually describing a full traditional service with cremation, but sometimes we assume their verbiage is our verbiage and they don't really understand what they're saying. So I love that part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's our job as educators and counselors, is to give them their options and show them, not even necessarily to upsell. Sometimes that will be the end result, but it's not the goal. The goal is really to educate them, because God forbid their family comes in at the time of their passing and, then they say, well, we didn't even know that was an option. Nobody told us that we could do this. And that creates, bad will towards the directors and the firm. So really what you're doing is protecting everybody by giving all the options that you can. I think one question that I used for years is just, what type of cremation do you want? Because cremation is the final disposition, as we all know, and if we keep that in mind, but what type of cremation do you want? Kind of, it confuses the family a little bit. Well, I didn't realize there was more than one type of cremation. Well, cremation is the final disposition, but before that, there are a bunch of different things that we can do, to make that more meaningful experience for your family. That's just basically what we're getting at. And I use that on the phone a lot when I am prospecting and, trying to set appointments, and people are like, oh, I just want to be cremated. I don't care. I just want to be cremated. Well, what type of cremation do you want? And then they're like, well, I don't know. And then you're like, well, maybe we should get together and kind of talk about your options here. So anyway, that's great. Thanks, Erin, for that input, because that really is super impactful and helpful.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys, I hope this helped. Thank you so much. I will see you all at noon on the next call. And
Michael, I have a question. Was there a slide before this one? I had to take a call. So was there a slide before this one? What was that slide?
Also, we're recording it, Cindy, if that helps. So we'll send out the YouTube link if you'd like.
Yeah. The thing you missed, Cindy, was just about professional courage, being able to guide your family. Yeah,
you've already got that in the bag, Cindy. Piece of cake.
Yeah.
Professional courage.
Okay.
Okay. Calls. That's it.
See you in a little bit. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Hey,
bye.
Hey, Michael.
Yes, Suzanne, go ahead.
I have a question for you.
Sure.